Desmond sat on the edge of his small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of his one-room apartment. The fan above barely moved, and the heat of the afternoon pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. It had been 2 years since he graduated with honors, 2 long years of endless job applications, interviews, and rejections. His dream had always been to work in a corporate office, wearing a suit and shaking hands with important people. But reality had been cruel. He sighed and checked his phone again. No new messages, no job offers, nothing. His savings had dried up, and even affording food had become a challenge. Friends he once studied with had moved on, some securing jobs, some starting businesses, but Desmond was stuck, waiting for a breakthrough that never seemed to come. Then one evening his phone buzzed. It was an old classmate, Jude. "Desmond, I have a link for a job. It's not what you're looking for, but it's something." Desmond sat up instantly. "What kind of job?" Jude hesitated. "A chauffeur job. Driving for a wealthy man, Mr. Ezekiel. He owns a big real estate company. He needs a responsible driver. I know it's not ideal, but it pays well." Desmond's heart sank. A chauffeur? After years of studying and struggling? He ran a hand through his hair. "Jude, I'm a graduate. How can I?" "Look, bro," Jude interrupted. "You've been searching for 2 years. You need to eat, you need to survive. Take this as a stepping stone. You never know what doors it might open." Desmond closed his eyes. He hated to admit it, but Jude was right. Doing nothing wasn't an option. "Fine. How do I apply?" A week later, Desmond stood in front of a massive black gate, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers. His polished shoes reflected the morning sun as he clutched his file nervously. The mansion behind the gate was nothing short of breathtaking. Tall pillars, lush green gardens, and expensive cars parked in the driveway. The gate slid open and a security guard led him inside. Desmond's heart pounded as he stepped onto the marble floor of the grand foyer. "Wait here," the guard said before disappearing. Minutes later, a tall man with sharp eyes and graying hair entered. His presence alone demanded respect. "You must be Desmond," the man said, his voice deep and commanding. "Sir." "Nice to meet you, sir." Desmond bowed slightly. "I'm Mr. Ezekiel," the man said, studying him. "Jude speaks highly of you. You'll be my personal driver. My schedule is strict and I expect discipline. No distractions, no mistakes. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Desmond said firmly. "Good." Mr. Ezekiel nodded. "Follow me." As they walked through the mansion, Desmond noticed how spotless everything was. Every corner smelled of wealth and power. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and the air conditioning made the house feel like paradise compared to the scorching sun outside. They reached the garage where sleek cars sat like silent beasts. "You will drive this one," Mr. Ezekiel said, pointing at a black Mercedes. "Know your duties. Be early, be neat, and stay out of trouble. My daughter, Angel, may need you occasionally, but your primary duty is me." "Understood, sir." Just as Mr. Ezekiel finished speaking, a soft voice called from the staircase. "Dad, who's that?" Desmond turned and saw her, Angel. She stood gracefully at the top of the stairs, her long dark hair cascading down her shoulders. She was young, maybe 19, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never known hardship. Her beauty was undeniable, and she had a presence that made people take notice. "This is Desmond, my new chauffeur," Mr. Ezekiel said. Angel's gaze lingered on Desmond for a moment before she smiled. "Welcome," she said sweetly. Desmond nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." Mr. Ezekiel dismissed Desmond to meet the rest of the house staff. Cooks, cleaners, and security personnel. Everyone seemed friendly, but Desmond quickly understood that the mansion ran on strict rules. He had to be careful. Over the next 2 weeks, Desmond adjusted to his job. He woke up before dawn, dressed neatly, and ensured the car was spotless. Mr. Ezekiel was always punctual, and Desmond never dared to be late. He observed everything: how Mr. Ezekiel conducted business calls, how he handled meetings. The more Desmond watched, the more he realized he could learn a lot from this man. Maybe, just maybe, this job wasn't such a dead end after all. But there was one thing that unsettled him: Angel. At first she was polite and distant. But soon she started making casual conversations whenever she saw him. "You speak so well, Desmond," she said one evening as he opened the car door for her. "Where did you study?" He hesitated before answering. "University of Lagos, ma'am." She laughed. "You don't have to call me ma'am. Just Angel is fine. Desmond nodded but remained formal. He could sense something in the way she looked at him. Curiosity, interest. He ignored it. Then small things started happening. She would accidentally run into him in the hallway asking random questions. She would sit in the car longer than necessary after being dropped off, striking up conversations. One afternoon she even asked him, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Desmond cleared his throat. "I'm focused on my future right now." Angel smiled in a way that made him uneasy. "That's interesting." One evening as Desmond parked the car after a long day, the head housekeeper, Mama Janet, approached him. She was an older woman who had worked for the Ezekiel family for over 15 years. "Desmond, my son, let me give you some advice," she said in a low voice. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced around before speaking. "Angel is a sweet girl, but she is also spoiled. Be careful. Mr. Ezekiel does not tolerate anyone getting too close to her. Many have lost their jobs because of misunderstandings. You are a good young man, don't make mistakes." Desmond felt a chill run down his spine. "I understand, ma'am. Thank you." As he lay in bed that night he thought about everything. He had come here for work, not for trouble. He needed to focus to avoid distractions. He had a future to build. But deep down he had a feeling, this job was going to change his life in ways he never expected. And not all of it would be good. Desmond had always been a man of discipline and focus, but Angel's growing interest in him was making his job more complicated than he had anticipated. At first he thought it was just harmless friendliness. After all, she was a young girl who had grown up in luxury, probably bored with her predictable life. But the way she looked at him, the way she always found excuses to talk to him, made him uneasy. It wasn't just in the car anymore. Angel started showing up near the garage when he was cleaning the vehicles. She would watch him pretending to be on a phone call or flipping through a magazine. "Desmond," she called one afternoon. He looked up from polishing the side mirror of the black Mercedes. "Yes, ma'am." She pouted. "How many times do I have to tell you to stop calling me ma'am? Just call me Angel." Desmond hesitated. He knew the power of familiarity. The more casual he became with her, the harder it would be to keep his boundaries. "Sorry, my angel," he corrected himself. She smiled. "That's better. So tell me, Desmond, do you like working here?" Desmond straightened his back. "Yes, it's a good job and I'm grateful for the opportunity." Angel tilted her head slightly. "But don't you ever want more?" Desmond exhaled. He did. He wanted more than anything to build a successful career, to be someone important. But that wasn't something he could share with her. "I believe every stage of life is a stepping stone," he said carefully. Angel stepped closer, resting her hand on the car's hood. "That's what I like about you. You're different. Most people working here only care about their salaries, but you have ambition." Desmond forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Angel." Angel's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary before she finally sighed. "All right, I won't distract you. But just so you know, I like talking to you, Desmond." She turned and walked away, leaving Desmond standing there, his heart pounding. He had done nothing wrong, but something told him that trouble was coming. Angel's interest in him only grew stronger. She would find excuses for him to drive her places, even when the other drivers were available. "Desmond, take me to the mall," she said one afternoon. He was about to protest when she added, "I already told my dad you'll be the one driving me." Desmond had no choice but to obey. As they drove, Angel kept looking at him through the rearview mirror. "You're always so serious," she said, pouting. "Why don't you ever smile?" Desmond forced a small smile. "I do, ma'am." "Angel," she corrected. "Angel," he repeated, shifting uncomfortably. At the mall, she didn't ask him to wait outside like she usually did. Instead, she insisted he follow her inside. "Come on, Desmond, you're my driver, but that doesn't mean you have to stay outside like a bodyguard. Walk with me." Desmond knew this was dangerous. If anyone saw them together like this, rumors could start. "Angel, I think it's better if I wait by the car," he said firmly. Angel's lips pressed together. "Fine. But one day you'll have to stop being so stiff around me." It wasn't long before the other workers in the mansion started noticing Angel's behavior. One evening, after Desmond had parked the car, Mama Janet pulled him aside again. "Desmond, my son," she whispered urgently. "I warned you before, but I see you're not listening. Angel is getting too close to you. This is dangerous." Desmond frowned. "I haven't done anything, Mama Janet." You don't have to, she said sharply. The problem is that she likes you, and if Mr. Ezekiel finds out, it won't end well for you. Desmond sighed. I know, Mama. I've been trying to keep my distance. Mama Janet shook her head. Try harder. Desmond knew she was right. If Angel continued acting this way, sooner or later people would talk. And once Mr. Ezekiel heard the rumors, it wouldn't matter whether they were true or not. A few days later, Angel sent one of the houseworkers to call Desmond. Angel wants you to come to her room, the maid said. Desmond stiffened. Why? I don't know. She just said it's important. Desmond hesitated. He had never entered her room before. Something about this felt off. But refusing might also be seen as disrespect. Taking a deep breath, he walked up the grand staircase to Angel's room. When he knocked, she called out, "Come in." Desmond stepped inside cautiously. The room was large and elegant, filled with expensive furniture, a massive bed and perfume that smelled like vanilla. Angel was sitting on the bed, dressed in a silk nightgown. The moment he stepped in, she stood up and locked the door behind him. Desmond's heart pounded. Angel, what are you doing? She walked toward him slowly, her eyes full of something dangerous. I just wanted to talk, privately. Desmond took a step back. This isn't appropriate. Please open the door. Angel ignored him. Desmond, I know you feel something for me. I don't, Desmond said firmly. She smiled, stepping even closer. You're lying. Desmond could feel panic rising. If anyone saw them like this, it would be over for him. Angel, please open the door, he said again, trying to keep his voice steady. Instead of listening, Angel reached for his hand. Desmond quickly pulled away, stepping to the door and trying to unlock it. Angel suddenly grabbed the door handle at the same time, blocking him. Why are you fighting this? She whispered. Before he could answer, they heard footsteps outside. A worker's voice called, Angel, is everything okay? Desmond's stomach dropped. If anyone found him here, it was over. Angel suddenly did something that shocked him. She tore her own nightgown and started screaming. Desmond froze in horror. The worker outside pushed the door open and Angel collapsed to the ground, crying. Help. He tried to force himself on me. Desmond's heart stopped. This was a trap. And he had just fallen right into it. Desmond stood frozen, his mind racing as Angel's screams echoed through the mansion. The housemaid who had been outside gasped, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of Angel on the floor, her nightgown torn. Before Desmond could even open his mouth to defend himself, the maid turned and ran down the hallway shouting, Somebody help. Angel is in trouble. Desmond's heart pounded. He knew what was coming next. He could already hear hurried footsteps approaching. He had to say something, explain himself. But who would believe him? Angel curled up on the floor, sobbing loudly. He tried to touch me. I told him no, but he wouldn't stop. The door burst open and 2 security guards stormed in, followed by more house staff. Then Mr. Ezekiel appeared. The moment Mr. Ezekiel saw his daughter crying on the floor, something inside him snapped. What is happening here? His voice was dangerously low. Angel pointed a shaking finger at Desmond. Daddy, he tried to. She broke into fresh sobs. Mr. Ezekiel's face twisted with rage. He turned to Desmond, his fists clenched. You did what? Desmond shook his head frantically. Sir, please, I swear I didn't do anything. Angel locked the door. Shut up. Mr. Ezekiel roared, his voice booming through the room. He took a step forward, eyes blazing with fury. I welcomed you into my home. I trusted you, and this is how you repay me. Sir, please, it's not what it looks like. Angel. Before Desmond could finish his sentence, Mr. Ezekiel swung his hand and slapped him across the face. The impact sent Desmond stumbling backward. The room spun for a second and the sting of the slap burned his cheek. Take this filth out of my house. Mr. Ezekiel barked at the guards. Desmond's chest tightened. Sir, please listen to me. I swear on my life I did nothing wrong. Angel. I said take him out. The guards grabbed Desmond by the arms. He struggled, but they were too strong. They dragged him out of the room, down the grand staircase, while the entire house staff watched. Some whispered. Some shook their heads in disappointment. Nobody believed him. The guards didn't just throw Desmond out of the mansion. They handed him over to the police. A few hours later, Desmond found himself in a dark, damp police cell, sitting on a cold floor, the scent of sweat and rust filling his nose. He felt numb. How had his life turned upside down so quickly? One moment he had a job, a plan for his future. The next he was accused of something horrible, something he would never do. The police officers barely listened to his explanation. A wealthy man's daughter accused you, one officer sneered. What do you expect us to do? Believe you over her? Desmond felt hopeless. He had no money for a lawyer. No connections to get him out. And worst of all, Mr. Ezekiel had influence. If he wanted Desmond to rot in this cell, it would happen. Days passed. Then weeks. Desmond sat in that tiny cell replaying everything in his mind. He barely ate. He barely slept. Was this how his life was going to end? He thought of his mother back in the village. If she ever heard of this, it would break her heart. He thought of Jude, his friend who had helped him get the job. Was he out there? Did he believe the lies too? And then he thought of Angel. Why had she done this? Why had she trapped him like that? And more importantly, was there any way to prove his innocence? One morning a police officer came to the cell door. Desmond. Get up. Desmond's eyes snapped open. His body was weak from weeks of malnutrition, but he forced himself to his feet. Come with me, the officer said. Desmond didn't ask questions. He followed the officer, his heart hammering. Was he finally going to court? Was he being transferred to a bigger prison? Instead, they led him to the station's front desk, where a familiar figure stood waiting. Jude. Bro. Jude rushed toward him. I've been fighting for weeks to get you out. Desmond blinked. What? How? Jude sighed. I made some calls. I spoke to some people who know Mr. Ezekiel. He finally agreed to let you go, but on one condition. You never come near his house again. Desmond felt a lump in his throat. He had lost his job, his reputation, and his dignity, all because of a lie. But at least he was free. As he stepped out of the station into the bright sunlight, he knew one thing for sure. He would never forget what happened. And one day he would make sure Angel regretted it. Desmond walked out of the police station a free man, but he felt broken. The past few weeks had been a nightmare. He had lost everything. His job, his reputation, and the trust of people who once respected him. He had been humiliated, detained, and treated like a criminal for something he never did. But as he stood outside in the fresh air watching cars drive by, he made a promise to himself. This was not the end of his story. He would rise again. Stronger than before. Jude took Desmond to his apartment, a small but decent place in town. You can stay here for now, Jude said. Until you figure things out. Desmond was grateful, but he knew he couldn't stay idle for long. He had wasted 2 years searching for a job before becoming Mr. Ezekiel's chauffeur. He wasn't about to waste more time. With no money and no connections, finding a new job was almost impossible. At first he took on small labor jobs, helping at construction sites, running errands, and even working at a local car wash. It wasn't much, but he needed to survive. Months passed, and though life was tough, Desmond refused to lose hope. One day, as he was reading a newspaper, he saw a government recruitment ad. They were looking for young, educated men to apply for a new department. Desmond jumped at the opportunity. With Jude's help, he prepared his application, updated his resume, and submitted everything. Days passed. Then weeks. Until one afternoon, his phone rang. Hello. Desmond answered cautiously. Good afternoon, is this Mr. Desmond? Yes, speaking. This is the Federal Recruitment Office. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for an interview. Desmond's heart almost stopped. He had a chance. A real one. Desmond arrived at the interview dressed sharply in a suit he had borrowed from Jude. There were hundreds of applicants in the waiting hall, but Desmond wasn't intimidated. He had been through hell and back, he was ready for anything. When it was finally his turn, he stepped into the interview room, where 3 high-ranking officials sat behind a long table. One of them glanced at his resume. Mr. Desmond, you have a degree in business administration. But your work history shows that you were a chauffeur. Desmond took a deep breath. This was his moment. Yes, sir, he said confidently. Life has not been easy for me, but I believe that every experience teaches us something valuable. I have learned discipline, patience, and the importance of perseverance. And I am ready to prove myself. The officials exchanged glances. One of them leaned forward. Tell me, Mr. Desmond, why should we hire you? Desmond did not hesitate. Because I don't give up, he said. No matter how many times life knocks me down, I always get back up. And if you give me this opportunity, I promise you won't regret it. There was a long silence. Then one of the officials smiled. Welcome to the team, Mr. Desmond. Desmond's new job changed everything. He worked harder than anyone else and soon he began to rise through the ranks. Within 4 years he had built a powerful network and was now working directly with top government officials. He was respected, wealthy, influential. And then one day, an opportunity came knocking. One morning, Desmond's assistant entered his office with a file. Sir, there's a company bidding for a federal contract, the assistant explained. But they keep getting rejected. Desmond took the file and glanced at the name. His body went stiff. Ezekiel Real Estate. Desmond slowly leaned back in his chair. So, it had finally happened. Mr. Ezekiel's company was struggling to secure a contract. And the man who had the power to approve it? Was Desmond. He closed the file and exhaled slowly. Fate had brought them back together. And this time, Desmond was in control. Desmond sat in his luxurious office, staring at the file on his desk. Ezekiel Real Estate. The name brought back a flood of memories. His wrongful detention, his humiliation, the pain of being abandoned and cast out like a criminal. But now things were different. He was in control. His fingers drummed lightly on the desk as he thought about his next move. The company had been trying to secure this government contract for months, but every time, it had been rejected at the final stage. Now he understood why. It was because he was sitting at the top making the decisions. And now Mr. Ezekiel and Angel had no idea that their fate rested in the hands of the very man they had once destroyed. Desmond pressed a button on his intercom. Let them in. The office doors opened and Mr. Ezekiel walked in, his presence still commanding, though there was a hint of frustration in his eyes. Angel followed behind him, dressed elegantly, but the confidence she once carried seemed shaken. They had no idea who they were about to meet. Desmond remained seated as they approached his desk. Good afternoon, sir, Mr. Ezekiel greeted, his voice controlled. Thank you for granting us this meeting. We have been facing some difficulties getting our contract approved, and we were hoping you could look into the matter. Desmond didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, watching them with an unreadable expression. Then very slowly he smiled. It's been a long time. Mr. Ezekiel. Mr. Ezekiel frowned, clearly confused. I'm sorry, do I know you? Desmond chuckled. Oh, I see. You don't recognize me. But maybe your daughter does. His eyes locked onto Angel. Angel, who had been standing silently, froze. Her face went pale. Her lips parted slightly in shock. Desmond watched as the realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Desmond, she whispered, her voice shaking. Her father snapped his head toward her. Angel, what is he talking about? Angel couldn't speak. She just stood there, staring at Desmond as if she had seen a ghost. Mr. Ezekiel turned back to Desmond. Wait, you're the... Yes, Desmond said coolly. I'm the man you threw in jail. The man you destroyed. The man you swore was a criminal. The room fell into an eerie silence. Desmond leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. And now you're here, asking me for help. Angel suddenly fell to her knees. Desmond, please. I'm so sorry. Mr. Ezekiel looked at her in shock. Angel, what are you doing? Tears welled up in Angel's eyes. I lied. Mr. Ezekiel's entire body stiffened. What? Angel's voice cracked as she spoke. Desmond never tried to touch me. He was innocent. I set him up because I wanted him and he rejected me. Mr. Ezekiel staggered backward. His face went from anger to disbelief to pure horror. You've lied. His voice was barely above a whisper. Angel broke into full sobs. I was stupid, Dad. I didn't think. I didn't want to lose him, so I made up that story. I didn't know things would go that far. Mr. Ezekiel turned back to Desmond, guilt deeply etched into his face. My God, he whispered. What have I done? Desmond watched them silently. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. For years he had dreamt of revenge. He had fantasized about destroying them the way they had destroyed him. Now, here they were, on their knees before him, begging for mercy. Desmond stood up slowly, walking around his desk until he stood directly in front of Angel. She didn't dare look up. He then turned to Mr. Ezekiel, who looked utterly broken. What do you think I should do? Desmond asked. Mr. Ezekiel swallowed hard. I won't beg for myself. I deserve whatever you decide. But my company, my workers, there are hundreds of people who depend on us. Please, don't let my mistakes destroy innocent lives. Desmond's jaw clenched. He had the power to ruin them completely. He could reject the contract and watch their business crumble. He could expose Angel's lie and let the world see what she had done. But was that who he wanted to be? After everything he had been through, did he really want to become like them? He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Then he turned to his assistant. Approve the contract. Mr. Ezekiel's head snapped up. Desmond's expression remained unreadable. You'll get your contract. But I want nothing to do with either of you again. Angel sobbed harder. Desmond held up a hand. Don't. There's nothing left to say. Angel lowered her head, shame written all over her face. Mr. Ezekiel bowed slightly. I don't know how to thank you. Desmond simply walked back to his chair and sat down. You can leave now. They hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood and walked toward the door. Just as they were about to step out, Desmond spoke again. Mr. Ezekiel. The old man turned around. Desmond's voice was calm but firm. Next time, listen before you judge. Mr. Ezekiel nodded silently before leaving with his daughter. The moment they were gone, Desmond closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. He had let go of the anger, the pain, and the past. And for the first time in years he felt free. As he turned his chair to look out at the city skyline, he smiled to himself. He had won. Not by revenge, but by rising above it. And that was the greatest victory of all. As Desmond was about to call his secretary for his next meeting, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for sparing us. I owe you my life. I wish I could undo what I did. If you ever need anything, I will be there. Angel. Desmond read the message and sighed. He didn't reply. Instead, he deleted the text and put his phone away. The past was the past. And his future was waiting. As Desmond leaned back in his chair, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The boy who once begged for a chance was now the man who held power. But even with all the success, he knew that true strength wasn't about holding grudges. It was about knowing when to let go. He stood up and walked to the large glass window, looking down at the bustling city below. He thought about the years he spent struggling, the sleepless nights, the hunger, the pain of betrayal. And yet here he was. Stronger. Wiser. Untouchable. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. His assistant stepped in. Sir, your next appointment is ready. Desmond turned, his lips curving into a small smile. Send them in. As the doors opened, Desmond took a deep breath. He had let go of the past, but he would never forget the lesson it taught him. He was no longer the victim. He was the man in control. And his story was just beginning. With a final glance at the past behind him, Desmond stepped forward. His future was waiting.